This is New Patreon presentation number 68 in the series of presentations I'm doing called Unraveling Yeshua's Hard Sayings. And this is about the issue of lending money for interest, or usury as it used to be called, lending money for interest. Now, where does this occur? Well, it does not occur in the traditional four Gospels, but in Thomas Logian number 5, it very clearly occurs. If you have money, do not lend it at interest. And the term is usury in English. But give it to one from whom you will not get it back. Well, this concept is implied throughout the Old Testament and in Christianity, but not specifically in the New Testament sayings of Yeshua. Usury was opposed by the Greek philosophers during the Hellenistic period. Here we have a quote from Aristotle. The most hated sort of moneymaker, and with the greatest reason, is usury, which makes a gain out of money itself and not from the natural object of it. For money was intended to be used in exchange, but not to increase at interest. And this term interest, which means the birth of money from money, is applied to the breeding of money because the offspring resembles the parent. Wherefore, of and modes of getting within wealth, this is the most unnatural. So there was there was lending money at interest, or what was called in the English usury, in the Hellenistic period and in the Second Temple period, in not just in Judaism, but among all the Greeks and different places where it was done. And that was something that Yeshua was opposed to. The Matthean Sermon on the Mount and the comparable Q material in Luke's Sermon on the Plain exhort Yeshua's hearers to lend money without expectation of return, which is essentially the same. They also teach that if one has money or clothing or other necessities, they should be shared or donated to those in need. Now, these teachings are reflected in the Johannine epistles. And 1 John 3:17 says, But whoso hath this world's good, and seeth his brother have need, and shutteth up his bowels of compassion from him, how dwelleth the love of God in him? A very famous quote. These were principles upon which the first Messianic communities were formed, where wealth and resources were shared. It also became the basis for Christian charity and charitable foundations. Now, we're going to take a look at the context of the idea of not lending an interest in Judaism and in the New Testament, early Christianity, and its authenticity with Yeshua. It was forbidden during the intertestamental period to charge interest, which we translate as usury, on loans to fellow Jews. Usury, and this term at this time in history means the lending at interest. In Leviticus 25:36-37, take no interest from him or profit. You shall not lend him your money at interest, nor give him your food for profit. In Deuteronomy 23, you shall not charge interest on loans to your brother, meaning your fellow Jew, or interest on money, interest on food, interest on anything that is lent for interest. You may charge a foreigner interest, but you may not charge your brother interest, your brother Jew. Now, in Matthew and Luke, the prohibition against charging interest to fellow Jews is assumed and is implied as independent mandates that we get from Yeshua. In Thomas, it appears without context and a series of davarim that are either independently transmitted or Gnostic versions of sayings from the traditional Gospels. The prohibition was applied to Christians from early on. Now, quoting from Wikipedia on its entry in usury, the First Council of Nicaea in 325 AD forbade clergy from engaging in usury, that was Canon 17. At the time, usury meant simply interest of any kind, and the canon merely forbade the clergy to lend money on interest above 1% per month. Later ecumenical councils applied this regulation to the laity. The Lateran Three declared that persons who accepted interest on loans could receive neither the sacraments nor Christian burial. Pope Clement V made the belief in the right to usury a heresy in 1311 and abolished all secular legislation which allowed it. Pope Sixtus V condemned the practice of charging interest as, quote, detestable to God and man, damned by the sacred canons, and contrary to Christian charity. Now, Yeshua certainly supported the prohibition against usury and didn't need to establish it as a new mandate, although his Devarim Thomas, which is independent, may be authentic. Well, how did this prohibition affect Christianity? The church considered itself to be the new Israel, and so it adopted many of Israel's Old Testament promises and prohibitions. The teachings against usury, which is making money by lending money, which were consolidated in the church councils, forced medieval Christian societies to borrow money for capitalistic ventures from Jewish moneylenders, since wealthy Christians would invest only in their own ventures, most of which were shipping and trade. This also resulted in anti-Semitic attitudes, such as we see reflected in Shakespeare's character Shylock in The Merchant of Venice. King Henry VIII relaxed the laws against usury during his reign, and that resulted in the development of banking systems and more enterprise. But in the 18th century, the Jewish goldsmith Bauer inherited his father's business, changed his name to Rothschild, and made a fortune lending money to governments on interest, which is now legal. This is a drawing from the period showing all the wealthy people and the Rothschilds around a monopoly table game. It's not from the period, actually. This is from the early part of the century. And they're gambling with the people's money, and they're charging interest, and they're getting richer and richer. It's sort of like playing Monopoly. Now, how this prohibition was circumvented is very interesting because it was considered to be anti-Christian and not right, but eventually we got a banking system, and now people lend at interest all the time. In fact, the interest is outrageous. Finally, the anti-usury laws of Europe, both the civil and the canonical, the church laws, were changed to allow for capitalistic lending. And that, along with the development of corporation law, resulted in European imperialism for major economic development and exploitation of the workforce. Here's a picture of very low-paid workers being exploited in England. Then, to assuage the guilty conscience of Christian entrepreneurs and satisfy relaxed church laws, non-profit corporations were legally defined and developed for charitable purposes and, of course, tax avoidance. So as long as these corporations could have some kind of charity they were supporting, they would be considered to be morally okay. Today, usury is understood to be an interest rate that is too high, but there are no laws defining it. Credit card companies can charge up the rates to 25% and higher with no serious legal consequences. That's what we call usury. The economic realities of capitalism and personal wealth have always been opposed to the teachings of Yeshua. His idea of social economics was based on sharing and charity, not exploitative accumulation of personal wealth. Yeshua was not optimistic about any change in world economy or the distribution of wealth anytime soon. He said, according to Mark and repeated in Matthew and Luke, "You have the poor with you always, and whenever you wish you may do them good." But eventually, in the Malkuth, there would be no poverty, illness, or crime, as in the apocalyptic visions of Trito, Isaiah, and other prophets. So that's the story of Yeshua's views on usury and money lending and so on.